Back in the saddle again. Back in the saddle again. Oh, hi. John O'Keefe here. What a beautiful day. Hi. How are you? So yesterday, oh my gosh. Did you see what happened at the end of this? Gregor trying to sneak out. Sister on back. Sleeping. Woke up for a brief moment while they're going crazily through Whitewater, underground, down through a traverse space. There are people chasing them. Boots does not wake up. Does not wake up. Unbelievable. Amazing. They find a beach. Gregor thinks it's a good idea to go off and sneak into a little bit of a cavern space and just see if they can tuck back in and be hidden. Runs right into a furry, fuzzy, large rat who's smiling at him. Have you ever been there? I have one little tiny story, 5 years old. Decide to go to the grocery store with my mom, right? Little Johnny, like 2.5 feet tall, maybe even 2 feet tall. And we are walking, and of course, mom is, doing her typical shopping. She is on her way down one of the aisles, and I see something out of the corner of my eye. I decide to go that way. And of course, as I go that way, you understand that my mother is that way, and I'm short, and it's the grocery store, and it's a big place, and no, don't worry about stranger danger, but it does come up a little bit. So as I get myself deeper and deeper into my adventure, right, I decide that I'm going to go all the way down this aisle because there's bright lights down there, like back where the meats and stuff are, back where the cheeses, because they always put those at the back end of the store. And when I get back there, I turn the corner, and right there is a person. Now, of course, remember, you're talking to a 5-year-old. There is the Mr. Peanut Man from all the Planters Peanuts, right? Like that guy with the top hat, he has a little eyeglass, and he truly is a peanut, right? So yes, it's somebody in a costume, but to a 5-year-old, I am looking at that, and all of a sudden he sees me. And of course is going to respond and come down, right? And there he is, looking at me, not as a human being, but as Mr. Peanut. Scares me like crazy. And just imagine being the person inside that going, I'm going to play the character, and I'm going to make this child feel good. But I'm lost, and I don't have my mommy, and I am in big trouble. Of course, mom comes running in and, comes running around the corner. Johnny, oh, like grabs me. And I'm like, you know what I mean? So that is my brief story about accidentally running into something that I had no intention of running into on my initial departure from where I had anticipated going, right? So we are on adventure. We are in chapter 8. We are on page 82 for those of you who are collecting that kind of data. If you're interested, grab onto your journal, grab onto figurative language that seems to grasp in your head, and let's find out what happens. Chapter 8, bookmarked, and I have no idea where we're headed. I'm not lying. I have no idea. Sam Baker, are you here? Are you here? You got to come and help me. You are the only person I know who has gone through all 5. I've known some people who have gone through 1, 2, 3, but 5. You know them all. Okay, anyway, chapter 8. Listen how this thing starts. With quotation marks. So I'm going to invent on the fly. Ah, here you are at last, said the rat idly. By your reek, we expected you ages ago. Look, Fangor, he has brought the pup. A long nose poked over the first rat's shoulder. It had a friend. What a tidbit she is, said Fangor in a smooth, rich voice. I will allow you to the entire boy, if I may have the sweetness of the pup to myself shed. It's tempting, but he is more bone than meat, and she is such a morsel. said Shed. I find myself quite torn by your offer. Stand you, boy, and let us better tell your stuffing. Gosh, they're talking about him as if he's the turkey at Thanksgiving dinner. The cockroaches had been freaky, the bats intimidating, but these rats were terrifying, purely terrifying. Sitting back on their haunches, they were a good 6 feet tall, and their legs, arms, whatever you called them, bulged with muscle under their gray fur. But the worst part of all was their teeth, 6-inch incisors that protruded out of their whiskered mouths. Pause. 6-inch incisors. Do you know what one of these is? This is a ruler, right? A way to measure things. Do you know how many inches are in a ruler? Yes, that's correct. We should probably have it on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 2. Wait, all the way down here. All the way down, 11 and 12. There we go. So halfway, right about there. Boom. 6-inch incisors. You got incisors there, right? 6-inch incisors. I have no interest in meeting a rat with 6-inch incisors. Do you? You think you can outsmart a rat? Did you know that they laugh at a higher decibel in the ultrasound level? So they go, and we can't even hear them. Did you know that rats did that? Just learned that today in class. Just letting you know. Thanks, Miss Miller, for the lesson. Okay, sorry. 6-inch incisors. There are 2 of them, one called Shed, and one called Fangor. I'm going to try to remember their voices. Okay. They were a good 6 feet tall, and 6-inch incisors that protruded out of their whiskered mouths. No. The worst part was that they were clearly planning to eat Gregor and Boots. Some people thought rats didn't eat people, but Gregor knew better. Even the regular-sized rats back home would attack a person if they were helpless. Rats preyed on babies, old people, the weak, the defenseless. There were stories, the homeless man in the alley, a little boy who'd lost 2 fingers. They were too horrible to think about. Gregor slowly got to his feet, retrieving the torch, but keeping it down at his side. He pressed Boots back against the cavern wall. Fangor's nose quivered. This one had fish for supper, mushrooms, grain, and just a bit of leaf. Now that's flavorful, you must admit, Shed. But the pup has gorged on stewed cow and cream, returned Shed. Not to mention, she is clearly milk-fed herself. Now Gregor knew what all the fuss was of the bathing had been about. If the rats could detect the handful of greens he'd eaten hours earlier, they must have an unbelievable sense of smell. The Underlanders hadn't been rude when they'd wanted him to bathe. They had been trying to keep him alive! Exclamation mark. He went from attempting to evade them to wishing desperately that they'd find him. He had to hold the rats off. It would give him time. The expression startled him. Vicus had said killing him would give the roaches no time. By time, did the Underlanders simply mean more life? He brushed off his clothes and tried to adopt the rats' casual banter. Do I have any say in this? He asked. To his surprise, Fangor and Shed laughed. He speaks, said Shed. What a treat. Usually we get nothing but shrieks and whimpers. Tell us, Overlander, what makes you so brave? Oh, I'm not brave, said Gregor. Bet you can smell that. The rats laughed again. True, your sweat carries much fear, but still you have managed to address us. Well, I thought you might like to get to know your meal better, said Gregor. I like him, Shed, howled Fangor. I like him too, choked Shed. The humans are commonly most dreary. Say, we may keep him, Fangor. Oh, Shed, how is that to be? It would entail much explaining, and besides, all this laughter gives me hunger, said Fangor. And me, said Shed. But you must agree to eat such amusing prey is such a great pity. A great pity, Shed, said Fangor. But without remedy, shall we? And with that, both rats bared their teeth, and moved in on Gregor. Gregor slashed at them with the torch, sending a trail of sparks through the air. He held it in front of him with both hands, like a sword, fully illuminating his face. The rats pulled up short. At first, he thought they were afraid of the flame, but it was something more. They looked stunned. "Mark you, Shed. His shade!" said Fangor in a hushed voice. "I mark it, Fangor," said Shed quietly, "and he is but a boy. Think you he is?" "He is not if we kill him," Fangor growled and lunged for Gregor's throat. The first bat came in so silently that neither Gregor nor the preoccupied rat saw it. It caught Fangor mid-leap, knocking him off course. Fangor plowed into Shed, and the rats landed in a heap. Instantly, they regained their feet and turned on their assailants. Gregor saw Henry, Merith, and Perdita zigzagging their bats above the rats' heads. Besides avoiding one another in limited space, they had to dodge the wicked claws of the rats. Fangor and Shed could easily leap 10 feet into the air, and the sparking ceiling of the cavern over the beach was not much higher. The humans began to dive at the rats, wielding swords. Fangor and Shed fought back viciously with claws and teeth. Blood began to stain the beach, but Gregor couldn't tell whose it was. "Flee!" "Flee!" Henry shouted at Gregor as he whipped past him. "Flee, Overlander!" Part of him wanted to, badly, but he couldn't. First of all, he had no idea where to go. His boat was high on the beach, and the tunnel. Well, he'd rather take his chances in the open than in the tunnel if he had to deal with rats. More important, he knew the Underlanders were only here because of him. He couldn't just run away and leave them to face the rats. But what could he do? At that moment, Shed caught the wing of Merith's bat in his teeth and hung on. The bat struggled to free itself, but Shed held fast. Perdita came in behind Shed, taking off his ear with one stroke of her sword. Shed gave a howl of pain, releasing Merith's bat. But as Perdita pulled out of her dive, Fangor leapt onto her bat, ripping a chunk of fur of it off its throat and hurling her to the ground. Perdita hit her head on the cavern wall as she landed and was knocked out. Fangor loomed over her and aimed his teeth at her neck. Gregor didn't remember thinking of his next move. It just happened. One minute he was pressed against the wall, and the next he had jumped forward and thrust his torch into Fangor's face. The rat shrieked and stumbled backward, right into Henry's sword. Fangor's lifeless body fell to the ground, taking the sword with it. Fangor's shriek finally woke Boots, who took one look over Gregor's shoulder and began wailing at the top of her lungs. Her cries echoed off the walls, sending Shed into a frenzy and disorienting the bats. "How fly you, Merith?" yelled Henry. "We can hold," cried Merith, although his bat was spraying blood from its wounded wing. Things didn't look good. Merith's bat was losing control. Henry was unarmed. Perdita was unconscious. Her bat was gasping for air on the ground. Boots was screeching, and Shed was insane with pain and fear. Though bleeding badly, he had lost none of his speed and strength. Merith was trying desperately to keep the rat from Perdita, but he was just one guy. Henry flew interference, but he couldn't get in too close without a sword. Gregor crouched over Perdita, holding the torch. It seemed a fragile defense against the crazed Shed, but he had to do something. Then Shed leaped, catching Merith's bat by the feet. The bat slammed into the wall, and so did Merith. The rat turned on Gregor. "Now you die," screamed Shed. Boots screamed back in terror as Shed lunged at them. Gregor braced himself, but Shed never made it. Instead, the rat let out a gasp and pawed at the blade that jutted through its throat. Gregor caught a glimpse of Luxa's bat, Aurora, flipping upright. He had no idea when she'd arrived. Luxa must have been flying completely upside down when she'd stabbed Shed. Even though Luxa had flattened herself on the bat's back, Aurora barely managed to pull out of the maneuver without scraping her off the ceiling. Shed slumped back against the cavern wall, but there was no fight left in him. His eyes burned into Gregor's. "Overlander," he gurgled. "We hunt you to the last rat." And with that, he died. Gregor had only a moment to catch his breath before Henry landed beside him. Pushing Gregor out onto the beach, he lifted Perdita in his arms and took off, yelling, "Scorch the land!" blood pouring down his face from a gash on his forehead. Mareth was already wrenching the swords from Shed and Fangor. He dragged the rats into the river, and it quickly carried their bodies away. His bat shakily regained the use of its wings, and he hurtled onto its back. Mareth caught Boots' backpack and hoisted Gregor onto his stomach in front of him. Gregor saw Aurora hook her clawed feet into the fur at the shoulders of Perdita's injured bat. Luxa had at some point retrieved the oil lamp from the boat. As they rose into the air, she smashed it on the ground. "Drop the torch!" yelled Mareth, and Gregor managed to straighten his fingers and released it. The last thing he saw as they darted out of the cavern was the beach bursting into flames. Oh, man. I did not expect that to happen so quick. I thought for sure there might be some action, but man, were they on it. The Underlanders are like speedy, man. They're awesome. Okay, chapter 9. Gregor watched the water flash under his eyes as he clung to the bat. For a moment, he felt relieved to have escaped the rats, but the fear of hurtling through the air on a wounded bat quickly overcame him. Boots had her arms clasped so tightly around his neck that he could barely breathe, let alone speak. And what would he say to Mareth anyway? "Wow, I'm really sorry about that whole thing back on the beach." He had no idea, of course, about the rats. But hadn't the Underlanders tried to warn him? No, they had spoken of danger, but no one had specifically mentioned rats except the cockroaches. "Rat bad," one had said. And later, they had talked about how much the rats would pay to bargain with Luxa. He and Boots could have been sold to the rats, and then what? He felt nauseous and shut his eyes to block out the churning water. The image of the carnage on the beach filled his head, and he decided the view of the water was better. It turned to blackness as the light from the fire diminished. When the light flickered off the waves again, he knew they were nearing Regalia. A group of undertakers waited on the dock. They whisked the unconscious Perdita and her bleeding bat away. They tried to take Mareth on a stretcher, but he brushed them off and insisted on helping to carry his bat inside. Gregor sat on the dock where Mareth had shoved him as they landed, wishing he could disappear. Boots was quiet now, but he could feel her little muscles were rigid with fear. 15, 20 minutes passed, maybe. He couldn't tell. "Up!" someone snarled at him, and he saw Mareth glaring down at him. The gash on his forehead was bandaged, the right side of his face bruised and swollen. "Find your feet, Overlander," Mareth barked. Had he actually thought this guy was shy a few hours ago? Gregor slowly straightened his stiff legs and stood. Mareth tightly tied his hands behind his back. No question about it this time. He was definitely a prisoner. Another guard joined Mareth, and they marched Gregor ahead of them. His legs moved numbly. What would they do to him now? He paid no attention to where they were going. He just walked whatever way he was pushed. He had a vague sense of climbing a lot of stairs before he entered a large diamond-shaped room. There was a table in the middle of it. Mareth pushed him down on a stool by a roaring fireplace. The two guards stepped back a couple of paces, watching him like hawks. "I'm that dangerous?" he thought foggily. Boots began to stir on his back. She tugged one of his ears. "Home," she pleaded. "Go home, Gigo." Gregor had no answer for her. People were hurrying past the door, talking in excited voices. Some peered in at him, but no one came in. In the warmth of the fire, he realized he was frozen. He was soaked in river water up to his waist and shivering from the wind and the horror of what he had witnessed, of what he had caused. Boots was in better condition. Her backpack seemed to be waterproof. She was pressed up against him. Still, her toes felt like ice when they brushed his arm. Fatigue washed over Gregor, and he wished he could lie down, just lie down and fall asleep and wake up in his bed where he could see the car lights flashing across the walls. But he had given up thinking that this was any dream. What had happened to the Underlanders? Perdita, her wounded bat, and Mareth's? If they died, it would be his fault. He wouldn't even try to argue that. Just then, Luxa appeared, burning white with fury. She crossed the room and struck him on the face. His head snapped to the side and Boots let out a cry. "No hitting!" She squeaked. "Sorry, no hitting!" she squeaked. No hitting!" She shook her tiny index finger at Luxa. Hitting was absolutely forbidden in Gregor's house, and it had only taken Boots a few timeouts to realize that. Apparently, it wasn't acceptable among the Overlanders either, because Gregor heard Vicus's voice ring out sharply from the doorway. Luxa! Looking like she'd love to slap him again, Luxa stalked to the mantel and glared into the fire. For shame, Luxa, Vicus said, crossing to her. She turned on him, spitting venom. This is metaphoric. Spitting venom. You get the idea. Venom comes from things like snakes that have poison. Venom comes from things like black widow spiders that have poison. Venom is a poison, right? She doesn't have poison per se, but boy, how does she feel right now? She's spitting venom. That's kind of an idiom and a metaphor at the same time. Spitting venom. Man, check it out so you know how to read this. She turned on him, spitting venom. 2 flyers are down, and we cannot awaken Perdita because Overlander must escape. Strike him? I say we throw him to the Deadland and let him take his chances, shouted Luxa. Be that as it may, Luxa. This is not seemly, said Vicus, but Gregor could see the news had upset him. Both rats are dead? He asked. Dead and in the river, said Luxa. We scorched the land. This matter of we, you and I shall take up later, said Vicus severely. The council is not pleased. I care not what pleases the council, muttered Luxa, but she avoided Vicus's gaze. So she wasn't supposed to be there, thought Gregor. She's in trouble, too. He wished he could enjoy the moment, but he was too racked with worry, guilt, and exhaustion to care. Besides, Luxa had saved his life taking out Shed. He owed her one, he guessed, but he was still stinging from the slap, so he didn't bring it up. No hitting, said Boots again, and Vicus turned to them. Like Luxa, Gregor was unable to meet his eyes. What did the Overlander Luxa? Fight or flee? Asked Vicus. Henry says he fought, Luxa admitted grudgingly, but without skill or knowledge of weapons. Gregor felt like saying, hey, all I had was a stupid torch, but why bother? Then he has much courage, said Vicus. Courage without caution makes for early death, or so you tell me daily, said Luxa. So I tell you, and do you hear? Said Vicus, raising his eyebrow. Do you hear not, as he hears not? You are both very young for deafness. Unleash his hands and leave us, he said to the guards. Gregor felt a blade cut through the ropes on his wrist. He rubbed the marks, trying to restore the circulation into his hands. His cheek throbbed, but he wouldn't give Luxa the satisfaction of seeing him touch it. Boots reached over his shoulder and touched the creases on his wrists. Ow, she whimpered. Ow. I'm okay, Boots, he said, but she just shook her head. Gather us here, said Vicus, sitting at the table. Neither Gregor nor Luxa moved. Gather us here, for we must discuss, said Vicus, slapping his hands on the stone surface. This time, they both took seats as far from each other as possible. Gregor pulled Boots up over his head and out of the backpack. She settled on his lap, wrapping Gregor's arm tightly around her and looking at Vicus and Luxa with large, solemn eyes. I guess after tonight, Boots won't think the whole world is her friend, thought Gregor. She had to find out sometime, but it still made him sad that tonight was that night. Vicus began. Gregor the Overlander, there is much you do not understand. You do not speak, but your face speaks for you. You are worried. You are angered. You believe you were right to flee those who kept you against your will, but feel sorely that we have suffered in your saving. We told you not of the rats, yet Luxa blames you for our losses. We seem to be your enemy, and yet we give you time. Gregor didn't answer. He thought that pretty much summed things up, except for the fact that Luxa had hit him. Vicus read his mind. Luxa should not have hit you, but your fight invited horrible death to those she loved. This is greatly felt by her, as both her parents were killed by rats. See why she hates this moment? See why she wasn't willing to take that out? Luxa gasped. That is not his affair. She looked so distressed that Gregor almost objected as well. Whatever she'd done to him, this wasn't his business. But it makes it so, Luxa, as I have cause to believe that Gregor may himself lack a father, continued Vicus. Now it was Gregor's turn to look shocked. How do you know that? I do not know for sure. I only guess. Tell me, Gregor the Overlander, recognize you this? Vicus reached in his cloak and pulled something out. It was a metal ring. Several keys dangled from it, but it was the roughly braided loop of red, black, and blue leather that made Gregor's heart stop. He had woven it himself during crafts class, that very same summer camp that Lizzie was at now. You could make 3 things: a bracelet, a bookmark, or a keychain. Gregor had picked the keychain. His father never went anywhere without it. Did you just hear what I heard? Did you? Did you hear that? Gregor's dad? The leather keychain? The bracelet? Never went without it? What's Vicus got it for? The quest. I'm reading until 30. I told you 30 minutes, right? 30 minutes. Chapter 10. When Gregor's heart started up again, it beat so hard, he thought it might break through his chest. His hand reached out on its own, his fingers grasping for the keychain. Where'd you get that? I told you other Overlanders have fallen. Some years ago, we rescued one very like you in face and feature. I cannot recall the exact date, said Vicus, placing the keychain in Gregor's hand. 2 years, 7 months, and 13 days ago, thought Gregor. Aloud, he said, it belongs to my dad. Waves of happiness washed over him as he ran his fingers over the worn leather braid and the metal snap that allowed you to attach it to your belt loop. Memories flashed through his mind. His dad fanning out the keys to find the one to open the front door. His dad jingling the keys in front of Lizzie in her stroller. His dad on a picnic blanket in Central Park using the key to pry open a container of potato salad. Your father? Luxa's eyes widened, and a strange expression crossed her face. Vicus, you do not think he... I do not know, Luxa, but the signs are strong, said Vicus. My mind has been on little else since he arrived. Luxa turned to Gregor, her violet eyes quizzical. What? What's her problem now? Your father, like you, was desperate to return home. With much difficulty, we persuaded him to stay some weeks, but the strain proved too great, and one night, also like you, he slipped away, said Vicus. The rats reached him before we did. Gregor smashed into reality, and the joy drained out of him. Of course, there were no other living Overlanders in Regalia. Vicus had told him that in the stadium. Vicus had told him that in the stadium. His dad had tried to get home, and he had met up with the same fate Gregor had. Only the Underlanders hadn't been there to save his father. He swallowed the lump in his throat. He's dead then? So we assume. But then came rumor the rats had kept him alive, said Vicus. Our spies confirm this regularly. He's alive? Asked Gregor, feeling hope rush back through him. But why? Why wouldn't they kill him? We know not why with certainty, but I have suspicions. Your father was a man of science, was he not? Asked Vicus. Yeah, he teaches science, said Gregor. He couldn't make sense of what Vicus was saying. Did the rats want his dad to teach chemistry? In our conversations, it was clear he understood the workings of nature, said Vicus, of trapped lightning, of fire, of powders that explode. Gregor was beginning to catch his drift. Look, if you think my dad's making guns or bombs for the rats, you can forget it. He would never do that. It's hard to imagine what any of us might do in the caves of the rats, said Vicus gently. To keep sanity must be a struggle. To keep honor, a Herculean feat. I am not judging your father, only seeking to explain why he might survive. The rats fight well in close range, but if we attack from afar, they have no resource but to run. All these things they wish a way to kill us at a distance, said Luxa. She didn't seem to be accusing his father either, and she didn't seem mad at him anymore. Gregor wished she'd stopped staring at him. My wife, Solvit, has a different theory, said Vicus, brightening a little. She believes the rats want your father to make them a thumb. A thumb? Asked Gregor. Boots held up her thumb to show him. Yeah, little girl, I want to know what a thumb is, he said, smiling down at her. Rats have no thumbs, and therefore cannot do many things that we can. They cannot make tools or weapons. They are masters of destruction, but creation evades them, said Vicus. Be glad, Overlander, if they believe your father can be useful. It is all that will give him time, said Luxa sadly. Be glad, Overlander, if they believe your father can be useful. It is all that will give him time, said Luxa sadly. Did you meet my dad too? He asked. No, she replied. I was too young for such meetings. Luxa was still concerned with her dolls then, said Vicus. Gregor tried hard to imagine Luxa with a doll and couldn't. My parents met him and spoke him well, said Luxa. Her parents, she'd still had parents then. Gregor wondered about how the rats had killed them, but knew he'd never ask. Luxa speaks true. At present, the rats are our bitter enemies. If you meet a rat outside the walls of Regalia, you have two choices, to fight or to be killed. Only hope of a great advantage would keep a human alive in their paws, especially an Overlander, said Vicus. I don't see why they hate us so much, said Gregor. He thought of Shed's burning eyes, his last words. Overlander, we hunt you to the last rat. Maybe they knew how people in the Overland tried to trap, poison, and kill all the rats above ground, except the ones that they used in lab experiments. Vicus and Luxa exchanged a look. We must tell him, Luxa. He must know what he faces, said Vicus. Do you really think it is he? She said. Who? He? Who? Asked Gregor. He had a bad feeling about where this conversation was about to go. Vicus rose from the table. Come, he said, and he headed out the door. I have a set of stories right here. You guys ever seen or read the stories of Harris Burdick, the mysteries of Harris Burdick? Chris Van Allsburg, you're God to me in regards to the ability to have really cool pictures. And then, so the cool thing is that you get this one picture and you get like you get a line, a quote, right? You get a title and you get a quote. And like for this one, it's a few days later, it happened again. And that's all you get. And then your job is to kind of create a story. And there is another one in here that I need to share because I just heard a very similar concept. Okay. So this one is called Archie Smith, Boy Wonder, right? See this boy, you see these magic lights that go there. And the one line that you get to tell a story. Now, it seems as though there's more lights coming from the outside. And so the part down here says, what a small voice asked, is he the one? And I love that idea. I like the concept of maybe being asked to go on an adventure. You know, like Dorothy in Wizard of Oz, like pretty much any great adventure that goes on. The Hobbit is asked to do the same kind of thing in J.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. But Gregor is in this position right now who has just realized his father is with the rats. He has learned a bunch about Luxa, and the fact that her parents were killed by rats. The fact that all of a sudden her entire demeanor changed. I mean, a couple bats lie in harm's way. We have Perdita, who's still knocked unconscious because they were trying to go out and save him, right? But then Vicus looks at Luxa, and Luxa looks at Vicus and says, do you think he's the one? Do you think he's the one? And Gregor's like, who? What? What? Who? What? 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 I'm just a kid. I'm 12. Geez, I just fell down a hole. I got my sister here. We're supposed to get back there so my mom doesn't freak out. But you just said that my dad was down here. He's been gone for 2 years, 7 months, and 13 days at this point. And they have evidence of him. Oh my gosh. You remember I'm not going to be here tomorrow. Means you're going to have to wait. But I hope you come back. I hope I left you at a sweet enough cliffhanger that either you go and buy the book and finish the story yourself, or you come back on Monday. and find out what they think he might be the one of. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for being a participant. Thank you for acting the right part. Thank you for listening. Thank you for participating. Get off the computer. Go outside and play. Life is happening right now. You only have today. You only have today. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Go out and find something amazing. I love you. Remember that today is the only day you have, and I hope you make it the very best possible today. And until we meet again, I want to let you know how much I honor and care for you. I love you. Now get out of here. Peace.